Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Board Explorers live feed this afternoon on the 22nd of June 2020. It's 4 o'clock here in jolly old Worthing, and I hope that you can hear me okay. I'm just going to turn my volume up a little bit. There we go. Nice to see you. We're going to continue with our reading of the story of a Norfolk farm. We're on chapter 13, I Buy Trouble. Hello to the lovely Julia, to Holly and Co, to Ed Loud, to Jeff Kellison, to James Poulton, to TurboStream and Linda Kane. Welcome to another week of chaos and mayhem from the Voby One-Eyed Kenobi. Here we are yet again. Nice to see you, by the way. Thanks for coming along. I've been in the kitchen knocking up a bacon salad. Oh, lovely. I'll be popping round. It's a bit of a trek up to Birmingham, but that sounds nice. I have actually been making some more bread after my disaster last week when I forgot that the loaf was in the oven and it came out as a solid piece of toast. A loaf of toast. And I have eaten it. I did eat the whole loaf of toast. And I've now got another one, and it's just rising in the kitchen. Hello to Graham Roffey, to Audrey Forbes, to John Morris. Hello to you guys, and to Sean's allotment. It's too hot to be outside. I have been outside. I was out early doing a 5-mile walk. Split it into 2 videos, which is always good because it means I've got one in abeyance. In abeyance? Is that the right word? I don't know. I must apologise for not sending in any vids, says Turbo. Don't worry. I don't think we've got very many this evening. Dash it all. I've been lip-syncing some overdubs, and now I can't stop watching Richard's lips to see if they move in sync. Well, my lips. Of course my lips move in sync. It's all very good, isn't it, here? Especially if you don't have to actually open your lips and move them a bit. Anyway, shall we crack on with our story? Sam seemed so keen on buying the lorry that I gave way to him, with the condition that he should stand by while the work was being done to see that it was being done well. It was a Morris commercial truck, 1932 model. Although four-wheeled brakes had been in use on well-designed cars and lorries for several years before that date in England, this model had brakes on the 2 back wheels only. It was a queer-looking lorry and seemed to be a discarded model. I have never seen another like it on the road. Having had unhappy experiences with local garages and the big Silver Eagle, I said that this time there should not be a big bill for indifferent work. For a fortnight, Sam stood about in the garage and watched the work. The engine was removed and sent away to a Bristol firm, the cylinders to be relined and the new pistons fitted and the crankshaft reground. The kingpins of the axle and steering and the phosphor bronze bearings to be renewed with the bearings of track rod and dumb iron. The gearbox was to be washed out and examined for worn cogs, a new battery fitted, a new front axle, heat treating of the old bent axle in a local forge was not good enough. The radiator was to be tested and sent away for repair if it leaked. The lamp wiring had to be renewed. A good second-hand tipping gear was to be fitted. The bottom of the truck body was to be encased in sheet iron for better tipping of gravel and flints. The torn driver's seat to be repaired. The brakes to be relined. And the trumpeting cured. 2 coats of good green paint to be laid on. The whole job with the lorry cost £68. Just sounds like, buy another lorry? Why bother? Clearly this bloke, this Henry Williamson, lovely author, writes fantastic books, absolutely Rubbish and all else, so it would seem. The day promised for the delivery of the lorry arrived, but no lorry with it. The migration was postponed a week. The trailer, nearly 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, low and light, with towing bar at one end and single detachable horse shafts of larch on the other end, was ready, and I was delighted with it. It had laths for hay at each end, fitted with the feet with iron hooks holding to rings bolted into the deal bottom boards. The sides were detachable. The rubber wheels on an old front axle of a lorry were boxed in elmwood. It would carry easily 1.5 tons of hay or straw, and it was so light when unloaded that one man could move it without effort. It was painted dark green, which was the colour decided upon for all the farm carts and implements. When was the lorry going to be ready? I asked Sam at the end of another week, when he reported that it was still unfinished. It was the engine, he said. I replied that we'd already wasted 2 weeks' rent of the gravel pit, and there were about 2,500 yards of road to be made by September, in addition to the several 600-mile journeys for the furniture. I went to see the garage proprietor. He soon got busy on the telephone. The engine, he reported, would be dispatched the next day. By passenger train? I inquired. He didn't know. I suggested he telegraphed at once, ordering that it be sent by passenger train. Meanwhile, why had the brakes not been relined? I asked Sam. Oh, said Sam, they've not required it. The linings were scarcely worn. But they were worn? Yes, a little. Then he had arranged to have the cost of relining deducted from the... Then had he arranged to have the cost of relining deducted from the estimate? He hadn't come to that yet, said Sam. But it was 2 weeks late already, I insisted. And what was the new axle? And was that the new axle? No, that was the old one. It had been straightened out in the forge and was as good as new. The garage proprietor had said so. It really wasn't necessary to have a new one. But, I declared, the first time I piled up the Eagle, the insurance people said that the old axle, heat-treated, was no good, but the makers said, no, it was not good enough. Well, you needn't shout, said Sam. In a conciliatory voice, I explained that most good firms supplied front axles at cost to avoid any possible accidents due to buckling or crystallization fracture at speed. Steel got tired and died like everything else. It gave up the ghost or spirit and returned to its ancestral crystals. Moderate heating in a low-powered forge would not make it youthful again. A passing mechanic, hearing the argument, said, "What that old lorry wants is a monkey gland," and Sam and I laughed. "But, you know," said Sam earnestly, "I can assure you that I've looked at the axle and seen no sign of crystallization. I guarantee it will be all right." "Well," I said, "you seem to be a good salesman for the other fellow. I'm here. I'm sure he'll be relieved to hear you guarantee his work, but actually, old boy, you're supposed to be here watching for our side. Business is a tug of war, you know, and the better side wins." Later I apologised for my sharpness, which was due to anxiety or desire to make a success of the venture. I explained, For only by scrupulous care and precision and forethought could we confound all the profits of inevitable failure. Sam did not bear any ill feelings for my sharpness, and we had a pint of beer together and looked at the garage proprietor's pigs, which he fed himself. He told us that he made £200 a year out of the pigs. He wished he could sell the dung, though. It was a little mixed with sawdust and shavings, and there was very little arable in Devon, so nobody wanted it. Many tons of it, all wasting. But in any other country but England it would be wanted. Do you know, in some continental countries today, even the new hemp pen mail bags are shaken out once a week, and the dust of the fibres carefully kept and collected for adding to compost heaps to rot down and to put on the land to increase its fertility. And here we are sending millions of tons of sewage daily to the mouth of the Thames, all the phosphates and nitrates and potash which should be feeding the soil instead of adding to the black mud of Southend-on-Sea and poisoning the salmon which every year try to get through the filthy cloudy water. That's what our town council does here in the river, he replied. Last summer, hundreds and hundreds of salmon, parr, and trout were found dead in the free fishing water, and the stink during the drought, poof, you couldn't get near it. The trouble is we've got too much money in England, and we get the best of everything. You may have, sir, but I haven't. In the pub I told Sam about the trade in bones after the Napoleonic War, when England imported 30,000 tons from the continent, grinding them up in mills to put on the cornfields. Wheat was then 9 times the price it was today. I had just read this in one of Sir Daniel Hall's books, which quoted the prospect of an early 19th century chemist. England is robbing all other countries of their fertility. Already, in her eagerness for bones, she has turned up the battlefields of Leipzig and Waterloo and of the Crimea. Already, from the catacombs of Sicily, she has carried away the skeletons of many successful generations. Annually, she removes from the shores of other countries to her own the manurial equivalent of 3.5 million men, whom she takes from us the means of supporting, and squanders down her sewers into the sea. Like a vampire she hangs on the neck of Europe, nay, of the world, and sucks the heart-blood from the nations without a thought of justice towards them, without a shadow of lasting advantage to herself. Sam looked far away in thought. He took a quick swig of his beer. Well, I must be getting back. There's a cut on one of the front tyres, and I want them to vulcanise it. In the interval of waiting, I bought the 3 condemned cottages from Mr. Matthew Bugg. Mr. Stubberfield had written that the walls and roofs seemed sound, and the price asked by the owner, £200, was about their value. He enclosed a copy of the District Council's report on their condition. Great Wordingham Rural District Council, Cottages at Creek, owned by Mr. Bugg. Particulars of sanitary defects. North Cottage. House dilapidated and damp. Roof, floors and ceilings defective. Dark and dilapidated pale closet in yard at rear, and pale has to be brought through the house to empty contents, there being no entrance to the yard. No drainage or facilities for washing. Yard at rear unpaved, and at higher level than the house. Middle cottage, as above, but with west wall bulged and leaning. Pale closet in garden. South cottage, as above, but pale closet in yard at rear, pale being carried through the house. I assume that they mean that there is pale closet is in other words for a WC, is it? And you've got to carry your effluent through the house. Is that what he's saying by a pale? P-A-I-L. Pale closet. I assume that's what he means. Mr. Stubberfield wrote that Mr. Bugg said there was another prospect buyer, so perhaps I would let him know as early as possible. I doubted Mr. Bugg's other buyer, but telegraphed an offer of 190. It was promptly accepted. Apparently the name of the damp little row was Chapel Cottages, a slate-roofed chapel, pride of the most sober inhabitants of Creek, stood in what was once the end of the cottage gardens. Yet despite the uneven tiled roofs, the cracked and bulging walls, the dirty frayed wallpaper, the pools of water on the plaster-littered floors, the majesty of the law dealt with them as thoroughly as if they had been Buckingham Palace. The legal procedure known as investigating title was so scrupulously carried out by Mr. Mordaunt Marjoribanks that at one moment it looked as if some of the original 10 chapel elders who put their marks, black-inked crosses, on the deed conveying the cottages years ago to Mr. Bugg might have to be exhumed by the Home Office to prove their legal title. The property was conveyed in 1899 to about 10 persons as trustees, and when they were sold in 1920, the portion of the property which you are now buying from Mr. Bugg, not all the persons who were parties to the 1899 conveyance were parties to the conveyance to Mr. Bugg. Presumably, those that were not made parties to the 1920 deed had died. The vendor's solicitors state that certificates of death can be obtained, but at your expense, and this is correct. The letter then took an almost antiquarian aspect of the Bugg houses. The title to this property, as agreed to be deduced, commences with a conveyance dated the 15th of February 1899 to a number of persons as trustees of the Primitive Methodist connection in the circuit in which the parish of Creek is situated, and it was conveyed to them subject to the trusts and powers contained in the deed of release dated the 24th of March 1864, relating to certain property belonging to the Primitive Methodists at Walworth, London. It is the practice for non-conformist communities to have their properties conveyed to trustees upon the trusts declared by an old deed known as the Chapel Model Deed. The different communities have their own model deeds, and they are probably more or less in the same form. The Primitive Methodists have a model deed dated the 24th of March 1864, and the property at Creek was conveyed on the trusts of that deed. We have delivered some requisitions to Mr. Bugg's solicitors on the subject of this deed, and asking for evidence that the formalities were complied with. At last, words were done with, and I was the owner of the Bugg cottages. The next thing was to apply for a Ministry of Health grant to recondition them. I felt I was beginning at last. The lorry was ready for delivery. Sam and I began to load it at 3:30 p.m. one day of mid-May. First, we went into the hut in the hilltop field to collect the yew-wood planks and posts which were lying there, with 2 of the lathes from the boys' workshops. We were still loading after dark, having twice unloaded to get all the stuff on. We had no lunch or tea, having been promised the lorry for noon, but the engine hadn't started, and at last it was found that the distributor was burnt out and had to be replaced. At midnight, the lorry, drawing the empty trailer, stood by the sandy creek which led into the estuary. We had no supper. 2 evenings before, I had rowed the small dinghy, once blue and white but now discoloured and dirty, across the tide flowing in Forth and chop of wavelet of the 2 rivers division, past Crow Island and so to the Branton Pill. We hauled and hoisted it over the sandy mud and got it somehow onto the trailer. Roped down securely, we pushed and pulled the trailer onto the back of the lorry and dropped the pin into the hole of the towing bar. I went on home in the Silver Eagle, meeting Letitia, who had been recalled from Westward Ho, where with the children she had been staying with a friend. By telegram, I had asked her to return for this important occasion, as we had had no food unless she cooked it. And at 1:30 a.m. Sam arrived after a slow journey in which the new and stiff engine had, for a moment, boiled and seized up the steep hill out of Swimbridge. The brakes were poor, trumpeting, as before, and in the morning I insisted the lorry must be returned for new linings. Told you you should have bought a new bloody lorry. Chapter 14 is one page. Items of cost. Henry Williamson, Esquire, to Messrs. Gaythorne, Warble, Hogg and Hattrey. Our professional charges and payments in the following matters: 3 cottages at Creek in Norfolk. In connection with your purchase of the above cottages, pursuing contract, investigating title, preparing and completing conveyance, fee, according to statutory scale, £6, 13 shillings and 4pence. For preparing and lodging particulars of the conveyance required under the Financial Act of 1931, 10 shillings and 6pence. Messrs. Lambeth, Reed and Co., fee for production of deed, £1, 1 shilling and nothing. Messrs. Whymper and Son, ditto of the above, £1, 11 shillings and 6pence. Messrs. Lambeth, Reed and Co., fee for completing stamp for conveyance, £1. Search fees, etc., 13 shillings and 4pence. Will, preparing and completing your will of the 29th of January 1937, as made out in detail, 16 shillings and 9pence, but reduced to £12, 12 shillings. Total £25, 9 shillings and 8pence. Received on the 20th May 1937. Gayborn, Warble, Hogg and Hattrey. Mordaunt, Marjoribanks. Most peculiar. That was it. That was the that's chapter 14 for you. That's just like their invoice. How bizarre. How bizarre. Is it a bit loud? I'm just going to turn it down a fraction. It seems to be a bit loud. Mr. Bug, yes, that's it. Horace, this nice. You're reading well again, Richard. Love the different voices you always do. Thank you, Ed. He's a financial whiz kid. Yeah. So on we go. Chapter 15. That was chapter 14. That was just an invoice. That was chapter 14. I become a road mender. At 2:30 p.m. on Friday, the 21st of May, 1937, our column left for Norfolk. First went the seal. I thought he'd been. I thought you just said he arrived. I thought they. Oh, maybe the lorry's gone for a repair. First went the Silver Eagle, drawing an old pattern of caravan, fitted with 2 beds, wash bowl, shelves, tables, oil cooking stove, and cupboard. Loaded, it weighed about a ton. Behind its number plate and oil tail lamp came Sam, driving the green lorry, to which was attached the trailer, on which lay the dinghy covered by a green cloth. The lorry also had a new green hood supported by 3 ash hoops. The journey took 2.5 days. The lorry averaged for the first 60 miles only 8 miles an hour and 8 miles to the gallon. It was supposed to do 18 miles to the gallon, but the engine was stiff, the ignition control was broken, the whole outfit was overloaded, and the hills were both steep and frequent. How does one know? This is a complete and utter disaster. Oh my goodness. After a mechanic in the garage had confirmed that the piston rings had probably taken up lost their springiness in the part-fused aluminium of the pistons, we continued the journey. It was miserably slow. Sometimes I crawled along behind the trailer for a change, but this irked me, and I passed to the front again. Unreasonably, I upbraided Sam for having chosen such a dud vehicle in the first place. I'm not at all surprised. Anyone, I declared, could sell him anything. He replied with truth that he had not bought it. I had bought it. His part had merely been that of one sent out in a restricted local district to find an inexpensive lorry. The brakes shuddered, and people stared whenever we stopped, which was frequently. Once, as I waited by a shop, signalling for him to pass, I spoke to a lounger, telling him half seriously that we were beginning something that would one day be famous in England's farming history. After staring at Sam's black-bearded profile under an ancient tweed fishing hat of his father's, he spat and replied, "Is that so? Who's the old Daddy Christmas driving the outfit?" It began to rain. The lorry went slower than before. We limped into Oxford at 6 o'clock on the Saturday evening. It was Eights Week, and the city streets were thick with cars and people. Neither of us could reverse. We could only stand still or go forward. How were we going to park that night was a problem. If we stopped by the roadside, it would mean lights on, and I doubted if the lorry battery was up to it. It was not a new battery, as had been stipulated. Sam said it was an old pattern. Why then had he allowed it to be fobbed off on him, I asked. "I don't intend to be drawn into further argument," said Sam. I like that. I'm going to use that line when someone has a go at me. I don't intend to be drawn into further argument. What are your intentions about the engine? Are we going to the Morris repair garage? If so, the sooner the better. I don't know about you, but I'm damned hungry. A policeman directed us to the Morris's garage. Fortunately, the entrance was wide, and we drove into a space between hundreds of cars. The manager shook his head. "Repairs? My dear sir, it's Eights Week," and with a wave of his hand over the other cars. I explained that we were on a long journey, and surely he could find a mechanic to look over the engine. It was constantly overheating. We suspected that the timing was late, and couldn't it be checked? If, on the other hand, it was a question of scored cylinders or pistols, then we must wait and get going the next day, or on Monday. It was essential, I persisted. At last, he weakened and called a mechanic. We went out to get some food. The restaurant was crowded. We waited 10 minutes. Then I got impatient, saying that one of us ought to be learning about the engine, watching the mechanic, and since Sam didn't move, I sprang to my feet and hurried down the high street to the garage. The mechanic had found the broken ignition lever, which had caused the engine to run on a retarded spark, thus heating it. He also said that the plugs were dud, with burnt out and over-wide spark gaps. Why hadn't Sam seen that they were checked? I fumed to myself. Sam came a few minutes later. He had not had any food. I said I was sorry for my impatience, but it did not alter his reserve. I felt it was a hopeless venture, but food would make things seem less miserable. We went out and had a pint of beer and some fish and chips in a nearby place. Afterwards we returned to the garage. About 11 p.m. we were ready to continue. The bill for the new plugs and the tune-up was £1 and 12 shillings. We left the luminous streets and the wide squares behind us for the narrow, dark road to Bicester and beyond. The stars shone overhead, though their brilliance was somewhat dulled by the indigestible and greasy food inside me. Midnight came, and 1 o'clock. Where would we sleep? I looked left and right continually for a space in which to draw in, but could see none. At last I saw a gateway with grassy field beyond, good for turning in. I stopped the car and walked into the field. A low roar came from the darkness. Was it a bull? In the torchlight the beast's eyes glinted red. Onwards again, and into the dreary small hours we crossed Buckinghamshire. At about 2 o'clock, weary of all things, I decided to pull in on the grass verge of the road. There were about 15 yards of rough, down-sloping grass between the road and the hedge. I drove onto the slope. The caravan lurched. The back wheels of the Eagle spun. It was soft, damp ground. I swore and stopped the engine. Sam followed, and, examining the ground, I said, "We must unhitch the caravan and haul it out by pole," which was inside. "We couldn't possibly shift it that way," said Sam. "Well, we must try," I yelled. "Very well, keep calm," he replied. The engine leaned sideways at a steep angle. Its iron hitch was pressed heavily on the tow bar of the car. It was immovable. "I can get you out of the difficulty if you leave it to me alone," said Sam. "How?" "By towing you with the lorry. We've got a long enough rope. I've done such things a dozen of times in Africa, though you won't believe it." "Right-ho. I failed, so have it your own way." Sam and I unhitched the trailer, which was heavy, but balanced. Then he passed the rope round the front axle and tied it to the lorry tow bar. "Won't it break?" "I doubt it. Best double it to make sure." "All right." The rope was doubled. I got in the car and started the engine. The lorry moved forward, took up the slack. A slight jerk, and I was moving. Easily, the lorry drew me onto the road. "Well done, Sam. I told you I could do it. I've been on the veldt for days and weeks with columns of lorries. The trouble is you want me to think with your head all the time instead of letting me do things my way." Soon we came to the dark silhouette of a group of buildings, which turned out to be a gravel washing and sifting plant. There was a concrete semicircular entry and exit from and to the main road. It was an ideal parking place. We pulled in, made the beds in the caravan, and lay down to sleep. As I look back, I wish I'd been able to take that journey easily. I wish we'd been carefree enough to have wanted to swim in the azure waters of the gravel pit. It was Sunday morning and no one was about. I wish that breakfast had been preceded by appropriate sniffs of appreciation for the sizzling sausages, as in all the boys' books of adventure that Sam and I read when we were young. As it was, the strains of the journey and the delayed start were still with us, and breakfast was a silent meal of unwanted food. But as the grey grew wider and the sun warmed us, the adventure took colour. Lorry and trailer rolled easily along the level roads. There was an interval for bread and cheese and beer in a pub, and fine natural countrymen to talk to. All through the day of blue and white skies we moved past fields of waving meadow grass and rising green corn, through the great flats of Cambridgeshire, along the north of Suffolk and the beautiful kept 6-mile Bottom Estate, and so to the heaths beyond Newmarket, the wild Brecklands, with their long straight roads over the heaths and through the vast plantations of fir. These were now familiar roads, bordered by twisted dark fir trees and ruined poplars, on to the country south of the Wash, winter home of the wild geese, our future home. And at last we were moving down the narrow village street, first the car and caravan, then dark green lorry with trailer topped by sailing dinghy, turning right over the bridge and down the deep rutted farm road, through the tattered gate, and so to a stop before the corn barn. We left the lorry and, returning on foot to the entrance, went up the hill to the top lane and so across grass to the site of the camp. Once again the caravan stuck in the sandy slopes and was free only after 2 hours of digging. We got to bed about midnight, supperless. Next day to work. We had 4 months before taking over as farmers. After the trailer was unloaded, wood in big barn by permission of Mr. Stubberfield, and boat in river, we looked at the lorry. One of the rear wheels was damaged, 2 of the bolts being sheared off due to careless putting on after the brakes were relined. We went to Welk in order to order new bolts and made arrangements for Sam to go into the garage the following Sunday to draw the pistons and inspect them. I saw the previous lessees of the gravel pit, who had written a complaining letter about being deprived of the material of their work, and arranged to let them take gravel as before on a royalty basis of 9 pence a ton. They promised to keep proper records. I went out of the office feeling almost a businessman. Returning to the farm, we said we ought to first find out what the roads were made up of. We ought to find out what roads were to be made up. We paced the rutted ways, silently stepping one behind the other, notebook in hand. We reckoned about 3,000 yards. Some of the wheel ruts of the past winter were 15 inches deep, in turf and dried mud. We reckoned we wanted at least 1,000 tons of flints. We drove to the pit to see what it was like. We had 1 pick, a heart-shaped Devon long-handled shovel, a short-handled heavy shovel called Welsh backbreaker, used for making dams in the river at Shallowford, and 1 wide shovel. The capacity of our tipping lorry was supposed to be 30 hundredweight. We started to pick down the tight-packed flints and chalky gravel and to fill the body. Our shovels were the wrong shape. Each thrust into the hard mass was like trying to push over the hill beyond. When we'd been stooping and shovelling and heaving and pausing and stooping again for about half an hour, we saw it would be easier if the side of the lorry was dropped as well as the tailboard. Our backs ached, patches of our hands began to grow red and to hurt. The sun shone down. I took off my shirt. RAF aeroplanes of the new aerodromes being made in Norfolk roared overhead, but we were too earnest to look at them. 1,000 tons in 4 months to be dug, carted and spread, and clearing the mud and the turf of the ruts. Would the lorry never look as though we were filling it? We told each other the lorry must not be overfilled. We couldn't afford to break down. Was it 2 tons? We asked the foreman of the gang of gravel shifters in another corner of the pit. He came over and looked at our load. About 1 yard, he said. A cubic yard, that was about 1.25 tons, we learned. Would it ever be filled? Lord, we had to fill the damn lorry 500 times in 4 months. I felt I could never lift a shovel in all my life. At last it was filled, and Sam drove off to the main entrance of the farm, which had been under water in the winter, and now was a half-dried morass of broken bricks, old tins, and worm-eaten lathes. The decayed laths. I think that's how I don't know how you... Laths, is it? The decayed portions of the old castle that had been strewn there, presumably as some attempt to fulfil Mr. Strawless's agreement to keep the roads in good repair. We got out of the cab, fixed the crank handles and began to raise the body on the upright iron tipping screw. At once it was apparent that the second-hand tipping gear that we had bought as reconditioned was worn out. The cogs inside the screwing box grated. We pushed and pulled at the handles. At last the body was tilted, but the gravel remained unslidden. It did not tip off. The old worn screw upright had been shortened and did not lift the body sufficiently high. We lowered the body again and began to shovel the stuff off. We took another load in the afternoon and threw it off with broken, blistered hands, after which, wet with sweat, we stood back and surveyed our first day's work. 4 tons covered 8 square or 2 linear yards of road. Our estimate obviously was wrong. 1,000 tons for all the roads. We would want at least 1,500 tons. It was overwhelming. We both felt hollow. A pint of beer each, bread and cheese, had been our only food that day. We sat down and tried to plan the next few weeks of work. Obviously big flints or boulders would be needed for the causeway through the meadows, even if we'd laid 5 loads today. If we could spread 10 tons a day, it would still take 5 months, not counting Sundays. 5 months. And we only had 4 months. And in this 4 months too, we must get a concrete mixer and lay down drains and concrete all round the farm premises. We must dig a well and lay pipes for water. You must erect posts and lines for electricity, Sam, as well as study the farming. And also we must acquire at auctions all implements we will want. First, I must find out what various jobs the various implements are for. Also, I mustn't forget the wiring, for only by that can we pay for the family in Devon and the materials up here. And, heck, I've forgotten about the farmhouse. You need to wire it for electricity, Sam, and we must get a bathroom built on it. Perhaps little Bly could do it. What? Do it ourselves, Sam? Oughtn't we limit our plans? Must we take on so much? How about putting the lorry away now? I'm tired. We ought to get a steak and fry it. Tomorrow, I've got to meet the builder about the Bugs houses. He's the chap who made such a decent job of Old's Castle. Sometimes he writes in such a, he truncates the 2 people talking in the same sentence, which is very difficult to conceive. There's only a page and a bit to go. Here's a picture of, I guess, the lane when it was finally laid out, if you're interested. During that first week, we both found it hard to keep on with pick and shovel in the pit. We knew we were bound to feel stiff and depressed just because our body tissues were being changed by the very hard labour of digging. Excuse me. Very hard labour of digging all day. While Sam cooked eggs and bacon or boiled a rabbit he had shot, I replied to letters and wrote my book. I'd had blisters before digging trenches, rowing, felling trees, and had never felt the kind of felt that all the felt I've ever felt in that felt. Never mind that, sorry, little ditty there. But never the kind that ached or burned all night, the very nerves or sinews or bones of the hand aching. It was the repeated shocks or bruisings of the pick on the flint wall of the quarry. Also, I learned what it was to have the eyes momentarily and forcibly closed by sharp sting of sweat. Was it nicotine, or because my ever-active brain created phosphates in the bloodstream. I found out also that hard bodywork uses energy as an engine uses petrol. Without food, there is no power. I found out too that beer made from barley was food. Then, languid with fatigue, a pint of beer gave me energy for at least another 40 minutes. We'd been working 4 days when a labourer came up and asked for a job. There was much unemployment in the village. The labourer explained that he wasn't much good for hoeing, which was seasonable just then, as he had lost an eye chopping wood a year or so back. I know that feeling, mate. He hadn't worked for some time, and it would take him a week to get into trim, but he'd work hard and do his best if we gave him a trial. We took him on. The first day he looked weary, and I stopped and bought him and ourselves a glass of milk each. He raised it and wished me the best of luck with the farm. "You're doing a fine job, sir, if you can stick at it. It's time this land was done decently again, as it was in the old days." Soon he was in trim and proved a willing and punctual worker. We paid him the current Norfolk labourer's wage of 32 shillings and sixpence for a 48-hour week. We soon had another helper, a young red-headed labourer who looked too slim for hard work, but he had a steady strength and never seemed to tire. After the first fortnight, and with the help of our 2 good men, road mending was easy and even pleasurable. My blisters became callous skin, my sinews ceased to ache. I could sling up shovelful after shovelful. We soon got the right shovels, and with ease. The yellow-white road crept up to the big corn barn and round it, and past the cart sheds and round to the pond to the granary. We reckoned that each ton cost 2 shillings and sixpence to dig, carry and spread, and on average a ton covered 2 linear yards of road. And I'm pausing there because that is the last... That's where we're finishing. But he just stopped that. That's really weird. We reckon that each ton cost 2 shillings and sixpence to dig, carry and spread, and on average a ton covered 2 linear yards of road. Semicolon. Chapter 16. That's supposed to be a full stop, but some idiots put a semicolon there. That's what confused me. Chapter 16, I observe flies and become a builder. Well, we will leave chapter 16 for tomorrow, for we have run out of time. But there we are. Fancy ending a paragraph and a chapter with a semicolon. Morton Lewis says, yes, dark beer has proteins. The Barrow boys in Covent Garden in the 18th century were entitled to 2 pints of Guinness per day, given beer tokens. Well, that's right. And of course, in the old days, you used to get what they would call porter, completely different porter. It was like porridge because it was thick. And the porters were those that would carry stuff from the ships. And they would unload the ships and take these things to the carts and what have you. And so they'd be unloading and taking things to different places, not just to the carts, but also to in the city, whatever city it was. And they often would go to an ale house and have a pint of porter, and there would be a ledge. They would sit on this ledge, drink this pint or quart or whatever measure it was, and drink this sort of black porridge, which was semi-alcoholic and pretty much whatever, refreshing them, but also giving them the nutrients to carry on that day. Back in the oldie days. I would have hired a mini digger, says Audrey Forbes. Yeah, it's quite interesting showing. I mean, he seemed to have a lot of money to be able to buy houses and things, but at the same time, he couldn't sort of employ people to do the job, or even buy a lorry that would do the job and save all that time. It's fascinating. Thanks, another great hour. That's good to know. Thank you, Edward. I always have a porter when I go to Bodine's restaurant, London. Only time I drink the stuff. Yes, I haven't drunk any real ale. I do like real ale, but it does send me to sleep. Turbo, don't just start on about mild. I've got a taste. I've not tasted a pint since 2014, the last time I was in Brum. Oh, right. Yeah, no, proper pint of beer. Yeah, I very rarely drink now. I'm not teetotal, but I just very rarely drink. I do like a pint of beer, but it takes me ages now. He needs a gallon of petrol and a box of matches. Oh, yes, just reading some of your comments. He needs a very nice man from the AA. Oh, yes, went out and had a pint and some fish and chips. That would be a big night out. Yes, I bet it would, Morton. Eat 8 miles per gallon. You should see Duncan Pitway's Fiat S76, the Beast of Turin, a former land speed record holder. Its 10-gallon tank was filled up 11 times from Bristol to Goodwood's engine. Is 28.4 litres. 28.4 litres. So there we go. Anyway, there we go. I'm glad that's all done. Thank you so much for coming along. I'm going to go and sort out my bread and light the stove and get ready for the Vogue show this evening at 8 o'clock. So take care. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back again tomorrow at 4 o'clock to read the next chapter. How far are we in? We're nearly halfway. Nearly halfway. My goodness. All right, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.